The San Antonio Spurs have the highest regular season winning percentage of any team in the NBA. In addition to this, they have 5 national championships. A team isn't this successful without having consistency, and for a lot of people, that's exactly what they think of when they think of the Spurs. Since the beginning, the Spurs have demonstrated a commitment to excellence in everything that they do. Growing up in San Antonio, I know how much we love our Spurs, and it was always something I could talk about with my friends at school. As I got older, I became more and more interested in the history of the Spurs, and how we came to the point where we are today. To understand where the Spurs are now, it's important that we look back on our history. In 1967, a team called the Dallas Chaparrals was one of the founding members of the ABA, the American Basketball Association. After a few years in Dallas, the team wasn't doing very well, and a group of San Antonio businessmen approached ownership and convinced them to move the team from Dallas to San Antonio, where they were renamed the San Antonio Spurs, and the colors we associate with them today, silver and black, became the team colors. The team improved greatly, and by the time the ABA and the NBA merged in 1976, the Spurs were one of the best teams in the league, and were chosen to make the jump from the ABA into the NBA. Under the leadership of superstar George Gervin, the team did a lot better than many analysts thought they were going to do. But despite this, the Spurs still weren't able to do very well in the playoffs. And after a couple lackluster seasons, George Gervin was traded away in 1985. Soon, though, things were going to change for the Spurs. During the 1987 draft, the Spurs were granted the first pick through the draft lottery and chose David Robinson from the Naval Academy. After his 2 years of military service were over, Robinson came back and helped the Spurs to have the single greatest improvement in a single season that's ever been recorded in NBA history. Despite this, Robinson still struggled to help the Spurs advance in the playoffs, and they kept losing out in the first or second rounds. Again, this situation was going to be changed by a first-round draft pick. This time, it was Tim Duncan out of Wake Forest. He, along with David Robinson, was able to help the Spurs to win their first national championship in 1999 over the New York Nets. Spurs as time went on, the Spurs continued to seek players from around the world for their talents, and brought players to the team like Manu Ginobili from Argentina and Tony Parker from France. These players, along with David Robinson and Tim Duncan, helped the Spurs win the 2003 championship over the New York Nets. After this championship, David Robinson decided to retire, and the big three of Tim Duncan, Manu Ginobili, and Tony Parker began to be the face of the Spurs organization. They continued to have immense success over the next couple years, winning a championship in 2005 over the Pistons and another one in 2007 over the Cleveland Cavaliers. After a couple years, the Spurs were again in the finals, and during the 2013-14 season, they won another championship over the Miami Heat after having a very impressive 62-20 season. Time continued on, but things began to change. The Spurs continued to have success, and eventually Tim Duncan did decide to retire in the summer of 2016. The Spurs continued to do well. However, during the playoffs of 2017, Kawhi Leonard, who many believed would be the face of the organization for the next years to come, sustained an injury and was sidelined for much of the next season. Following that season, a disgruntled Leonard requested a trade, and the Spurs ended up trading him to the Toronto Raptors. That same offseason, Manu Ginobili decided to retire, and Tim Duncan went to the Charlotte Hornets. The Big Three era was officially over. Despite all the recent changes that took place for the Spurs, they've continued to fight in the West. Using players that they've brought in over the years, they've managed to retain a competitive lineup that continues to pose challenges for teams in both the Eastern and Western Conference. It's important, as we're looking towards the future, to remember where the Spurs have come from. Their origins in the ABA, transitioning to the NBA under the leadership of George Gervin, the time that they had with David Robinson and Tim Duncan, and the other members of the Big Three going forward, are important to the Spurs' history and culture. They were always committed to making sure that the team did the best that they could, not in a flashy way, but with a focus on the fundamentals. Moving forward, as the league resumes in July, we should look to the Spurs and see how they're going to take the challenges that have been thrown at them and are able to turn them into a successful, hard-fought rest of the season, and hopefully get us to another playoff spot.